All right, so got a couple things to go over today. We are going to start with an example, which is kind of the example version of what we were talking about on Tuesday. Because like was mentioned then, whenever somebody chose the textbook for the statewide shell, I guess they had assumed people would have had object-oriented programming in several courses. So the book was kind of overwhelming and not really the introduction level with it in the book. So I want to clear up some of the stuff that was probably confusing when you read that. But the most important thing for us, what's going to make building websites so much easier from PHP, we get from the introduction level to object-oriented programming. So we backing it off, and we're going to start with the example, which is pretty much what's going to be doing the homework to make sure we get over that part. And I was thinking if it's at the beginning of the video, it'll be much easier for you to find in case you need a reference when working on the homework. Then we'll get into a little bit about exception handling, which the book kind of glossed over a very important part on exception handling. You may have seen it in other languages where we have our try catch blocks, or I guess a bunch of you are in Python class. In Python, it's try and except, but we have those blocks built ready to go. In PHP, the language is set up ready for us to build those. So they're not entirely set up beforehand. And the book kind of jumped into it quickly, which is really some kind of that more advanced object-oriented programming stuff. So we'll talk about that, and I will show you something else that is, the book didn't mention at all, that is kind of important, and that's that our try-catch blocks, even as if we build up really nice ones, it doesn't cover the core part of the language. So our example we're going to start off with is what we really need to make building websites easier. Essentially, what we're getting ready to look at, that stuff from the other day, the encapsulation, it's going to turn the work from building web stuff one page at a time until we get the whole site built, to building web stuff a site at a time. So we do a whole lot of the commonality stuff all at once. And it's that encapsulation concept. So just to review where we were the other day, I was trying different colors. It looks like the green and yellow and orange kind of show up on the board pretty well. The others, I have to break the piece of chalk and write sideways. I think I kept grabbing red ones. And then I noticed the other day it didn't show up as well as I thought it did in the videos. But yeah, right before class, I did actual video, finally got around to doing actual video confirmation of what color of chalk is going to show up. So we'll talk about encapsulation, and the idea is objects represent, we build an object that represents what we need in the code. It's a representative model of everything we're going to need in our code. And the first of the three key concepts is encapsulation. Everything that representation or model needs to be included. Capsule is the middle part of the word encapsulation, so you can think of like a time capsule. If we went and dug up a time capsule today that was buried in the 1950s, maybe, somebody would have sat down and tried to think of what items represented daily life in the 1950s, sealed that up, and then buried it. And there was no need to open it back up and adjust everything, because everything in that time capsule represented that day and time. So if we opened it today, we would see a representation of what it was like to live in the 1950s, is one way to think about it. But everything, encapsulation, everything the object will need is included. I like the donut picture, because another concept for that is we want to add layers of protection as much as we can. So sort of an inner and outer circle. So this inner circle is protected. There's a buffer area that keeps us from getting right in there. Now, the inner circle has our properties. The aspects about our object, colors and numbers and the exact values, which the term we're going to use is data fields. And next week, as we move into databases, it is not a coincidence that we use the same term for this as we do for the cells in the database. We did not run out of words and have to start reusing them. So there's a big connection there where we'll see. But the properties about our object, what color is it? How much does it weigh? What sort of sound does it make? The descriptive things or the data itself, essentially the variables we want to work with. We put those in this inner circle. We make them private so that they're not accessible from the outside. And then the outer circle will have our behaviors. And our terminology for that, we call them methods, which you may have already encountered moving through programming classes. Methods and functions, we use those words interchangeably. Technically, methods go with an object or a class, and functions stand on their own. But for us in PHP, our keyword to create a method, even inside of a function, or even inside of an object, is the word function. So you'll often hear that word creep out when you're like on a team of programmers developing a website or something. So outside is the client, whatever needs to actually use that object. And we can protect our data a little bit by restricting the client to only having access to our public behaviors. And then our public behaviors have access to those private data fields. So it helps to protect our stuff. And this is the picture of what we wanted to kind of do. And so before we get started coding, let's think about our class example. I'll draw the wireframe up here. Whoops, go chalk. So we had a title up at the top. So line down here, our Navbar over here. I'll just write nav a few times to represent the links. And then our main content, which I'm going to put in parentheses because the main content changed on every page, right? And that's kind of the representative page from our example website, right? Every single one had all of this stuff and this, and then only the content changed. So if we want to kind of make it look like in this model, all of this stuff is the same every time, right? I'll put that over here. That is always the same on every one of our pages. And this part changes. So in order to encapsulate all this data into just the idea of a page, a representative model of our page, we need these two parts here. What's always the same, we can set that up so that it's always going to be the same, and then we only have to make it once. And if we want to come back and adjust it, we only have to adjust it once, and that adjustment carries through because it's always the same. And then this part is what's changing. So it's kind of like in the circle, that stuff that's always the same, that's going to be our inner protected area. The client doesn't really need to, when we ask for a web page, we don't need to mess with that. We just ask for a web page and we will get all of that stuff. And then we need a behavior to change the content for the particular one we're working with. Does that idea make sense with the encapsulation stuff we were talking about the other day?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like there was a few different features. I think that like where did we do it where we made everything stay still on the page? Where it would, if we scrolled, it still just stayed still, but almost like this is an external something to say this stuff is gonna stay locked. Is that kind of similar?
No, not like that. So
okay, because I missed last week. Sorry.
The stuff on the page, like these are all HTML elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have the header at the top and all our links.
Okay.
On the example, we have the thing here for that. So even if it's staying still, that's just the style sheet.
Okay.
We have those words in the text file, right?
Okay. So Chris,
yeah.
If I'm understanding what you're saying, how we used to have to copy our page over to the next page and then delete the part that changed, instead of that copy and paste mess, we're just going to have this standard template, and for each page we'll shove in the content that's changing.
Exactly. Yes.
And it's almost like we're making a photo. It's like we're making a photocopy of it, or make it so we can duplicate this sucker 100 times if we need 100 pages.
Exactly.
A lot easier. Okay.
What we're doing here, Tiv, is it's the words, the HTML code. We're reusing the HTML code.
And the circle is the program that's going to have like the PHP and the MySQL in it, the content.
Oh, well, that's what's different on the page.
But could that still be HTML? What's in that circle? Okay.
Well, it's on a web page, so it has to be HTML.
Okay.
So that's the only HTML that changes.
Okay.
This is in the background. We're not changing the appearance of the page. It's still going to look and act exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're changing is how we code it up.
Okay, so if I go to whatever page, like even just use an example, like my one of these books that I'm using online, everything on the page looks exactly the same, but then whatever page I'm switching to, like if I say go to the next page, that would be the content, but everything else on the page stays still, so I can click up there and say, okay, go. That's not the same?
That's not the same. You're thinking of the front end.
Lord. Okay.
That's the result. This is the code. The code that makes that, or the code that does all this.
Okay. Joe, help me out. Where am I messing up? Joe,
don't look at me. I mean, basically, I think what Chris is saying.
Wait till we get to the example.
I'm making it too hard. Okay.
Let's wait for the example.
Sorry.
That's a great idea.
I'm making it harder than it is probably. Okay, thanks. I'll wait.
Yeah, you missed the stuff the other day, and it's you're trying to jump ahead. It'll probably make more sense after we see the example. So your comment, Joe, you mentioned the template. It's exactly like that. 2 words that are going to show up. A class. So that's what we're actually making. That is typically we use the word blueprint. A blueprint or a template that gets reusable over and over and over again. And then object, that is when we use the class. I'll put build from that blueprint. So we put together a blueprint for what a web page is going to be. And then whenever we need one, we build all the HTML code from that blueprint. Does that help, Tiff? So we're not at the front side. This is the code in the background.
Okay, I understand. So that's what this is, the server side that's happening once we get the information from, then this is kind of what's making the whole thing kind of mix and run on the server side.
Well, we do this in all our languages. It's a different way of writing code.
Okay, thank
A
you.
different methodology to approach writing code.
I'm excited to
hopefully
see
it'll
the example.
hopefully it'll make more sense after the example, because yeah, you missed some of the stuff the other day, but it's an active subject. We learn by doing it. So let's do this and we'll see this. So from this picture, kind of breaks down what we need to have consistent and what we need to set up a way to change for. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And pull up the examples from class. And I figured that we would want to see more than one example. That's why I emailed out those files last night. It's been like 6 weeks since I did the practice getting ready for class. I was like, well, as we move into the next phase next week, I should probably practice again this weekend. So I just quickly set up a little framework to do some practice this weekend. I was like, oh, this is a great example of what we're covering in class. So I might as well send those files for a second example after we modify our class site. So here in the folder for the htdocs folder on my localhost server, so we can run this stuff. We have all the stuff for the class. This one. I guess this was the last one on there, so I'm going to copy that, make a copy of that module 3 one, and rename it the 4.
I'm sorry again. I'm trying to follow along with you. So I just opened the file that you sent, and then so I clicked on social 2.
Oh, that's a different one. This is the class examples we've been building up. That's just an extra one to look at if we have time.
Okay.
It covers the same concepts. So we'll look at that in a little while. Okay. This is just our the class examples we've been using. So I'll go ahead and open all of them and get ready to edit them. Probably don't need all of them open. And then just open them here in the browser. Which is going really, really slow. For some reason. Okay, there we go. So in the class folder. So here's where we finished up last time. How's that way down there? Did you do that in all of them? Okay, so something strange is going on here.
Geez, this is messing up like one of mine, Chris.
Yeah, so let me check and see why that's messing up and get back to the thing that worked. So it should be somewhere in the style sheet. This is too wide. %, and 75%. Maybe if
what are you looking at when you said it's too wide? Just so I can.
All of the stuff down here. Okay. The main content's going to the bottom instead of
spreading out. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, actually,
you got a lot of padding there. Is maybe that it?
Could be. I might be looking at the wrong style sheet. Let me empty the cache. How much padding was there? Oh, yeah, that's why.
God, the broken clock was right.
Yeah, I don't know where that 72 point came in. Maybe 15 point padding. Okay, there we go. Good catch, Joe. Yeah, I was looking at the wrong number altogether. I would have had to get down to like 10% width before it fit on the page. But so this is what our page looks like. And like I circled on the board, every single page we have this. If we click between the links, we'll notice there at the top, the Navbar over here and the bar separating it from the content. It looks like it doesn't even change that. It looks like only that content is changing. So that part is kind of what we could keep the same everywhere. And then we just need some sort of behavior for our blueprint in order to change this out. So
Can you make keyframes go over the navbar if it's okay? So if you added keyframes, would it only be within the content, or you said, I mean, could they overlap?
Keyframes have to do with animations. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah. So like say for instance with Joe, like I don't know if he did, but like where he had a bike that was going to go across the screen, could you make the bike go from all the way from the navbar across where the content is?
Yeah, you just have to put something on top of it. That's a bunch of styling stuff. So that's something different than today. So flipping through the pages here, this reviews.php page, that has all of that stuff, right? It's basically all of this that's going to stay the same. So all of this stuff up at the top, we can keep the same every time. And this is what you were asking earlier, Tiv, where it's not what we're seeing, it's the code in the background. We don't have to write this code every single time because we'll see the same code on that page and on this page and on this page and on this page. And it shows up on all those different pages. So that's a lot of writing code. And if we need to make a modification, we have to go back and do it everywhere.
So that means as we add new pages, we just add the new nav elements to the template and Shazam, there we go.
Exactly.
God, that'll be nice.
So let's go ahead and start a new one. And this has to be, so all these things that were HTML files will move, they'll have to be PHP files now. But there's a couple shortcuts we're going to see that things I've found over the years that will hopefully make it a little bit easier. Our example is going to mix and match some styles of doing it. So we'll see different ways. And you'll just have to, there's more than one way to get the data into the object, basically. So since we're restricted on time, we'll have to look at a couple here in the class. So I'm going to create a new PHP file that just defines what we need. So not the actual page, the blueprint from the page. I think everybody's well aware of subdivisions. Right? It's a common thing in America. So in a subdivision, they often build houses very similar, right? So maybe there's 6 acres worth of 2-bedroom ranch homes with a basement and a garage. A typical American subdivision. I guess that's almost exactly like Whittier, the town in LA where they filmed Wonder Years. It's 120 square miles of 2-bedroom ranch homes with a basement and a garage. The standard American subdivision. And when they start building those, there's a blueprint for a 2-bedroom ranch home with a basement and a garage and all that. But all of those houses are slightly different, right? Our blueprint defines what it means to be a ranch home, but then when the builders get started, they'll add little changes in the details to distinguish each particular instance of that. And an instance of A programming class is called an object. With the ranch home, each instance of the ranch home might have slightly different shutters. Sometimes the garage is on the right, sometimes it's on the left. Different doors. Some of them have a full basement, some of them have a half basement. And those subtle different, we can modify our blueprint when we go to use it as an object. A similar thing here. So we need to set up that blueprint. So I'm going to make the blueprint, and we, depending on how you like to organize things, with PHP, we're not restricted. You can put it in the library and just put all of your code and stuff in one spot. I like to put each object or each class in its own file. Instead of one big file, I have lots of short files. I find that easier to work with. In some languages, we're actually required to do that, but in PHP, we could build one huge library of classes or spread them out. And I like the spread out method. I find it a lot easier to work with lots of short files than one giant file. So I'm going to create a new thing here, and I always give the file the same name as the class. So I'll call this blue page.php. And this is going to be the blueprint for what it means to be a page on our blue pen site. So bluepage.php. And then our keyword, so written on the board, class is our technical term for a blueprint of an object. So we start with that word, class, and then give it the name. So we're going to build this class, which is a blueprint for a website on our page. And there's a couple methods that we always want to put in. One of them, the first one is a constructor. And that is the method that gets called automatically when we ask for a version of this. And our term for that is an instance. We create an instance of this blueprint, and that's what an object is. So whenever we create an instance, that's called instantiating the object, the very first method that gets called automatically is a constructor. And it needs to be accessible from the outside. So this is that two-circle thing I drew on the board. If we want things to be accessible from the outside, we put in the word public, which I misspelled.
So you call that on the back, I drew that. You call it a constructor? What's in the back? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to call this a constructor. It has a specific name we have to give it.
And then each one is an instance. Is that kind of like an iteration?
That's when we actually use this. So okay. The class is a blueprint, right? So think of a subdivision. There's a whole bunch of houses built off the same blueprint, but each house is its own unique thing. So the class is like the blueprint, and then when we instantiate it, create an instance of the class or the object, that is just a version of something built from this blueprint. And the first method that gets called, we want it accessible from the outside because it's going to be used, it's going to be asked for, and then it is a function, is a constructor, and we write it with 2 underscores and then the word construct in PHP. So in all our languages, constructors are always a little bit different. For PHP, has to be a public function, just a couple keywords, then 2 underscores and the word construct, and then any arguments we want to pass in and the stuff we want to put in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark out the spot for that method. We'll come back and fill that in a moment. But that's what actually builds our object from this blueprint whenever we ask for one. So the completely empty one like this is included. If you don't need to do anything special when you start your object, you're just going to create it. The data fields will be filled up, and or you're going to manually fill up the data fields once you have an object to work with, not on the blueprint. And you don't have to do anything to start off. This completely empty one is there for us. I just wanted to start with that because that's where we start at. And another important one that we always want to do, and is a string representation of it function, and then that as well has 2 underscores and 2 string. So notice that these 2 methods that I just started with, they start with 2 underscores. There's a long list of things that start with 2 underscores, but that basically means the language itself will call those methods for us. And what this one does is we just need to return on toString. We always just return a string representation of our object. So we can say something like, what this is the blueprint for, a web page for the Blue Pen Ink Company site. And just a string representation telling what this is. As you do it more and more, you'll want to make that more specific. I just wanted to say what it is. And I'm getting ready to erase this line, but then I'll come back. A line I'm getting ready to erase. So later, whenever we create an object, we can say echo some new blue page object. If we just echo the object itself, the operating system is going to ask for this underscore underscore toString method. So that gives us a way that we can just echo a default string for the page to represent our object. So you always want to make sure there's those 2. Some sort of constructor. With PHP, the blank one is included, so we could leave off the blank one. But if we have anything specific that we want to pass in, we'll want to put that there. And we'll want some sort of representation. At least for debugging, there's going to be times when we want to echo back and see what our object is. So those 2 methods, you pretty much want to put in every single thing. So now we need the data about our page. So I'm going to refer to maybe the index page. So I'm going to close everything out except for the index page. That way I have a reference of what I'm building. Because we want our blueprint to make this code for us every time. It's going to basically be this whole thing except for this right here. What changes in that article tag, that's the content. That's the part that changes. Everything else is exactly the same. So there's a couple ways we can do this. As I look through here, got the title of the page there. So probably want some data to represent that, right? So that'll be the first data field we make. And essentially they're variables. We're just setting up variables, but we need to consider that access level. Are they going to be public or private or protected? For us starting out, let's do everything as just private and public. And public means it's accessible from the outside. Private stuff cannot be accessed from the outside. So for starting out, it might be helpful to think about it in terms of you, because you're writing this code. So the private stuff, as the programmer, only you have access to it. And the public stuff is what you're going to let other people get to, or the language itself in the case of these double underscore things. So we need a private data field for the title of our company. So I'll just call it that, title, and that one's not going to change. It's all, in this case, it's a very specific company we're making a site for. It's a made up company, but still a very specific company. So that's never going to change. So we could go ahead and put the value here. Title, what was it? Blue pen ink. So we could put that there, but it is much, much better form to only declare stuff, declare our types. And then any values we want to put in them, we do in the constructor. So that's why I went ahead and started with the constructor, because like I said, the empty constructor will be included. It will write the empty constructor if we don't put one. But it's better form to just say we have some private data field representing the title of our site. And then to fill it in, we have to refer to the object we're writing. If we just said title, that would be a local variable, right? Not this variable up here that, as I goes with this blueprint. So to refer to it, to refer to ourselves, we use the keyword this. So the $, then this, and then we draw a little arrow. So dash angle bracket, which has a lot of meaning. In your other courses, you're probably used to using the dot. I guess I could talk about it a little. And then we put in that data field, but notice the $sign got moved way over here to before the this. So no $sign after the arrow. So this, referring to the class we're writing, this class points at has a data field. One of the things it has is it points at this data field called title. And that's going to hold that blue pen ink, the name of the company I made up for here. And everyone on the board, how about here on this page? So what that arrow's for? What that arrow is doing is in like JavaScript, you've been doing this a lot, right? Using the dot operator everywhere for those in that class. Or in Python, we use the dot. If you remember these little diagrams, I keep drawing the stack heap diagrams. Kind of hard to write with the mouse. But the stack, this side represents the code we're writing, and the heap represents RAM. So either way, over in RAM, somewhere we're storing this blueprint, right? It's really hard to write. I'm going to abbreviate that. So that's the class. This blueprint is stored over in RAM somewhere. If we use a dot, like in JavaScript or Python, we're actually making a copy of this. I'll do that last line. Let me change colors. We're going to take this, make a copy of it, and then this points at this copy of the class, not the class itself. And then when we start doing stuff, that dot refers to all the data fields we set up, and it's a copy of it, not the actual class. So it's kind of like we're doing this. We're going back and forth, 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 over and over and over again. But when we use the arrow,
And the original class has never changed because you're only working with the copy.
yes, when we use the arrow, a pointer, that's abbreviation for this. So let's say X equals new, I can write with the mouse, new class. I'm just going to write CL because it's really hard to write with the mouse. Sorry. Then we would use the dot. But do you all remember seeing the wildcard selector in database class? I'll call this Y. So
Was it
the
the
arrow-
asterisk in database?
Yes. Yes. So the Y, when we use the pointer, that is an abbreviation for the wildcard selector of that class. So when we use the pointer, we have the option in C++. In Python, they don't really give it, or PHP, they don't really give us the option. So this is, with the pointer, we're using the actual class. So instead of all that back and forth between the stack and the heap with the diagram, we go over here and do all our work over here, and then come back once when we're done. So different types of memory management. So some languages, we have the dot and the pointer so that we can choose which one we want to use. And in other languages, they went ahead and restricted and said, just do it this way. So most of the ones you've seen probably just use restricted to the dot, but in PHP, we're restricted to the pointer. So our object-oriented stuff, it behaves the same way, only we need that dash arrow every time that you would put a dot in most of the languages you're probably familiar with. It means the same thing. And when I'm thinking about code, I actually think dot when I write the arrow. I've done it so many times. So if I say dot while going through this example, I'm referring to that arrow because until we start worrying about what's actually happening between the processor, RAM and incrementer sections of the CPU, the dot and the arrow are essentially the same. So if we're writing our code, that's essentially the same as the dot. So I may accidentally say dot sometimes here, but this object has, so either a dot or an arrow, this object has a title data field, which is private, and we're going to fill it up here in the constructor whenever we ask for a new one. And then we just want to go through our page like this and find the stuff we need. So there's that. This is another one that might be nice to change. That's some data that we're going to need, right? Everything else in that link is consistent for any page we put together. What type of, it's the MIME type, it's a CSS data stored in text format. The relevance of it is it's a style sheet. The only thing that's going to change is where that style sheet's located at. So that might make another good data point here. So make a private data field called style, and then in the constructor, I'll fill that up. And again, these are never going to change, so you could set them equal, just assign them up here, but it's better form to do it in the constructor. So I wanted to make sure and follow the better form in the class. So this class, and this keyword gets the $, points at a data field. This blueprint points at a data field called style, and the computer will know what to do with that information. So that equals whatever that style sheet was called, bluestyle.css. I'll copy and paste it just to avoid chances of a typo. Always a good idea to copy and paste as much as possible.
quick question, Chris. I'm sorry. Does that private, the title and style, does that have to go above the public function? Does it have to come first?
It not necessarily, but in some cases it might make a difference.
I didn't have any room on my page, so I was going to write it somewhere else. But if it has to go first, then I'll just rewrite this whole part. Okay. I would code it exactly how I read it.
Conventionally, we do the data fields first and then do all the methods. That's just the convention most people follow. But okay, you could scatter that around. Just a way to keep. Just first is typically the standard organization theme, I guess, because that way we can look at the top to see what data we have, and then our methods are down below it. So what other data do we have here? So the rest of that, we can just echo back and throw that essentially variable we put together in our blueprint in there. Everything else looks like it'll be the same. This is just HTML code. That's going to be the same everywhere. Well, there's the title. We already have that stored. We don't need to store it more than once, right? These are different, where these links are going. And there's more than one link. Definitely something that seems like it would go nicely in a collection, right? Instead of 3 separate variables, we set up an array of our links. And we have 2 parts, 2 things we need. The home, those links go someplace specific. When we put this example together, we were able to put basically except for index, we put the same words on the links that the user sees as the name of the files, but that's not always the case. So what I like to do is the words that the user sees, I make that the key, and then the link itself is the value, just to help keep things organized. So we need a private value called links, and that's going to be an array. So then down in the constructor, when we create this, we'll say this class points at a data field called links, which is an array, and it's going to hold the location of a home page. I meant to do a single quote there. And I put an extra square bracket, sorry. It's going to have a home page with our other type of arrow, the equal sign arrow, a home page that points at index.php. Because we are getting ready to replace all the HTML files. There will have to be PHP files to use this. So all of our pages are going to be .php files now. Then we have a order page, which using the equal sign arrow points at a thing called order. Is it order or orders? Order, no S there. A page called order.html, but our updated version is going to be .php. And then we'll have a link called review that points at a page called review.php. So I think that one was already a PHP file. And that way we have all our links stored in a nice, convenient place to get to them. You could just put them in an array, and you remember it's 0, 1, and 2 if you like working with numbers. I just find it's useful to work with the names, the associations as much as possible. It gives us something meaningful to work with. That gives us our most of what's just the data points. Does that make sense to everybody? We're just kind of setting up data points as we go through here.
Yes, did you have a semicolon at the end of that closing bracket?
Sorry, what was that, Tiff?
Did you have a where you had the links? Was there a semicolon at the very end? Did we have to put a semicolon?
Yes. I might have forgot it. I probably missed it because I was talking at the same time.
I think I seen it. I just didn't.
Okay, I might have missed it. And the Breeze question is the index HTML. Currently it is, but we're going to replace it with a PHP object. So it will be, we're replacing all these HTML files. So the new version here in a few minutes will be a PHP file. I can't get back to the chat room button. Sorry, there it is. Have I mentioned that I'm not a fan of disappearing buttons? Right. Go up here.
Yes.
Click. Okay, yeah. So we're updating it to something easier to work with, and that'll take care of all of our static data. Right. The links are the same everywhere. The style sheet's the same. In our case, a very common thing anymore is to make that adjustable, right? At least a light and dark theme, so people can choose whether they want the white background or black background on sites. And that is just a matter of giving the user a button with the option of which style sheet they want to load in, which would be done exactly like this. We keep that style sheet in the variable, so that button just changes what's in that variable. A very simple concept. But for us, that's our static data. Then all these HTML elements are going to be the same every time. And then finally, we get down to this, what's changing, our content, the actual content for the page. So I'm going to make a variable for that, a private variable called content. That way, it's private. It's right. That's our variable. Nobody else can get in there and mess with it. The only way they can adjust anything is going through us. But we'll need public ways to do that. So, and that's going to be different every page, right? We don't necessarily know what that content's going to be. But by the time we ask for it, by the time we're ready to turn this blueprint into an actual object, we'll know what the content is. So we can pass it into our constructor. So I'm going to pass something in called content. And this is the parameter in a function. We've talked about this before. Parameters have local scope. So calling content here, I gave it the same name as this one so I could keep them straight. But in order to access this one, I have to say this arrow content. This class points at content. So they won't get confused, but having the same name there makes it easier. Some people do kind of prefer to just give this a different name. Like you could call this con and just remember that that's the content. And that way you don't have the same name showing up everywhere. Personally, I found that giving them the same name makes it easier to keep track of, but they don't really have the same name because the one with global scope across our entire class is this content. And the one I passed in is just content. So whatever the part that changes, we'll just pass into the constructor. Or if you prefer, you could make a method that does that. So an alternative, I'm getting ready to erase this. You do a public function and set the value of content. And again, pass something in and then say this content is assigned whatever content we passed into that function. I guess I don't have to erase it. I can just leave it there. So that's an alternative. For this situation, I was thinking it would probably be easiest just to pass it in the constructor. But we could do an empty constructor and then call this method afterwards. So that sets up our data. Does that much make sense? It should all look familiar for just kind of setting up data. The biggest difference is we have this special function called a constructor with the keyword construct and a couple underscores to indicate that the language is going to ask for that one, not a user. We won't ask for the constructor, the languages. The people that wrote PHP will ask for the constructor. And we've seen functions and variables. So it should look very familiar, just a little bit extra stuff. And one of the key points, what I mentioned is good form, is anything other than declarations should really be done inside of a method, such as in the constructor method here. We declared that we had a bunch of data fields, those 4 data fields, but we didn't do any assignments on them until inside of our constructor method.
Okay,
Okay,
I have
go ahead, Tim.
one quick question. Oh, sorry. Joe said that, so if you have something that you want to add to a different page, like let's just say it's a store and you want to add, go to the store or add a shopping cart. So this is what it looks like to me from what I'm listening. Like these templates that you're saying, like I'm going to have 100 of these templates, and I can be using this template and these constructors and all that. I can add or take away anything on each of them.
Your microphone's cutting out a little, but yes, essentially.
Okay.
And again,
email you. Thank you.
that's jumping ahead just a little.
Okay.
We'll see some more stuff. What was your question, Joe?
Yeah. So if I have a footer, I would just have a private variable called footer, and then I would
Put all the stuff in there. Yes.
I mean, the footer doesn't change, so it would be something I do in the constructor, just like I had, except, and like if I just have a certain string of text that is part of my footer, some simple thing. It's not a file name or anything, but
Yeah, you could just store it as a variable and then access it. Although if it's never going to change, you can also echo back the string, because that's what we're getting ready to see.
oh, okay, sure, yeah, because I've got even on the thing I did for you, I put a little footer on her thing and made up an address or something.
Yeah. So
I'll need to know how to do that.
you could either, the next thing, we're just going to send back some. So first off, we'll look at just sending back strings, and then we'll look at the first of several better ways to do it. So I moved that set content method down just because of how I organize things. Consistency makes a big difference when it comes time to track down problems. So it's good to always set things up the same way. So I always set up the data fields first, and then the constructors, because we might have more than one. Actually, I'll go ahead and do more than one. So before we do that, Joe, let's look at this other concept. So this constructor, we said we're going to pass some stuff in. But maybe sometimes we're not going to pass stuff in. We need a blank one. That's what's called overloading. We can write more than one constructor. And as long as we have different parameters the computer will be able to tell them apart. So that if we don't have our main content to pass in, if we don't have anything to pass in, we will just do this stuff. So I'll copy those 3 lines. Whoops. So this is the data that is always the same, right? So if we don't know what our main content is, we can just ask for, we can not pass anything in. And it'll fill up this, and then later we can call that set content method to fill our content out later. But if we do know what the content is, we can, whenever we call the constructor or ask for a new object, we can go ahead and pass that in, and it'll fill it out for us. So that's called overloading. It basically gives us more than one option on a constructor method. And as long as we have different parameters for each one, the computer will never get them confused. The computer looks at the parameters that we pass in and then decides which one of those methods we wanted to run based off the parameters we pass in. So if we just ask for an object and don't send in any parameters or don't send any arguments, it'll run this constructor. And if we ask for an object and send in one parameter, it'll run this constructor. So our term for that is overloading. I'll put a comment here. Overloading the constructors. That way we don't have to make completely separate objects depending on whether we know ahead of time what the content is or not. So I always like to put those right up at the top because that's the stuff, that's just the general setup stuff.
Okay, so question. So you would use the one with this that would then call the set content function if the content was dynamically determined by the user rather than by you.
Exactly. Yes, that is a great example. Or if it changes, right? If the user has a bunch of buttons and it's going to keep changing. So yeah, if the user's doing it.
I consider that the user changing, because if the user hits button A, then it's going to show that on that page. If he hits button B, it's going to show something different. Like if he clicks on which story do you want to see? I've only got one page, but he's going to click the story.
Exactly. And when we're writing our code, we don't know which one to load in. So we'd have to set it up to fill that up later instead of at creation.
And the variable content would be determined by what button was hit.
Exactly.
Which I'm sure you'll show us sometime, maybe.
Yeah, we'll see a couple things. We'll see some more. Actually, we'll see quite a bit of that when we get to the database. Because on the database, if the content depends on the data, we can't really fill it up until the user tells us what data they want to see. We can't just give them the whole database every time. That would just be overwhelming. So that would be a good example of what you were just saying. So yeah, there's different times when we want to get everything prepared, right? I use the typical American suburb or subdivision with 2-bedroom ranch homes, a garage and a basement, and there's still a lot of variance, right? There's different sizes of porches that go on them. Sometimes the garage is on the right, sometimes it's on the left. Half basement versus a full basement. Those little changes, we're making a blueprint, so we need to be prepared for all the versions of the blueprint that we would use. And now is our main thing where we want to type this code in. So I'll start with the header. And I'm going to go ahead and include the doc type, consider that part of the header, and all the way down to the head tag. I'll call that the head section. So I want a method that makes that part of the page. And if it was dynamic, like if you gave the user options on style sheets, you might want to make it an object that does just that part and then pull the object in. But for now, let's just stick with one object and we'll deal with inheritance and mixing them in a little while. So I hit copy on all that text. So selected the head, the starting, the first stuff that's going to go in the HTML code. So that, I'm going to come over here and create a public function. I'll just call it make head. So we'll make the head section. And basically all it needs to do is echo that, right? It's going to echo and paste all that code I just copied in. But we got to do a little bit of cleanup here, right? First off, we can only echo back a string. So we know we'll need a quote mark here and here, and then a semicolon at the end. And I'm going to take out some of this white space. So I'm going to go down here and just turn that into a string on one line like we're used to seeing strings. Because all this was copied and pasted, so I know there's not any typos there. But scrolling over here, well, what we're echoing back needs quote marks in it, right? Which means we need the escape sequence. And one thing that can be really, really useful is notice we can see where those escape sequences need to go because the text is the wrong color. And if we start here on the left, if you start at the beginning though, notice that it changed the color as soon as I put the escape sequence in. So what I found can be really useful is start at the end of the line and then come backwards. Because then it won't change color until you get the starting quote mark on it. It makes it easier to not miss any of those closing ones because it doesn't change colors till you get that start one. So just start at the end and then use that color coding to see where all those escape sequences need to go. And our style sheet is data so that we can easily change that, right? If we're showing this off to a client, we might have blue style version 1, version 2, a dozen different versions of a style sheet. That way at our next meeting with them, we can just quickly switch that out and see which style sheet the client likes best. So instead of that, it's stored as a variable. So that means we need to concatenate it in. And let me do that what I just did again, because so this right here is the stored as data. So I need to take that out and put in the reference to the data field. So I'm going to clear that out. And that means it needs to go in quote marks. So I'll put the opening and closing quote marks, and it's concatenated. So inside of that, I'll do the dot dot. And that's the way I always work when I do those. Just over the years, I found that can be much more efficient. Like take out the data and then do quote marks, then the concatenation operator, and then put the data back in. So it's like working from the outside in instead of left to right. So definitely out of that order that we're used to with English, right? Instead of going left to right, like putting all those escape sequences in, if we work left to right, then our color coding changes before we get all the quote marks changed. If we go backwards, we still have the wrong color until we get all the way over to the right. And here, it makes it easier to not forget those symbols. Because mostly what we're thinking about is that we need this class pointed as a data field called style that refers to the style sheet we need. And then if we have, a dozen style sheets we're going to let the client choose between, at the meeting, all we have to do is change this line right here. And that'll immediately update that style sheet. Any place we reference the style sheet on all our pages. Does that make sense? Everything there, it should look very familiar. If it helps to think about it, it's just throwing in a variable. It's a longer way to reference a variable, a longer way to refer to a variable. We need the this keyword as well to mention our class. And at this point, well, we don't have anything that's going to show on the page, but we can at least view the page source and see if this echoes back correctly if we want to do this. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to go ahead and create the new index page. And this is what Bree asked a moment ago. Our old index page was HTML, but our new one needs to be a PHP file in order to instantiate that class into an object to work with. It's almost like a dictionary. What we did so far is the definition of a word. We haven't used that word in a sentence yet, if that helps to visualize it. So I'm in the right folder, and I'm going to make a new one called index.php. And before I forget, I'm going to change the name of the original index file. I'm going to take the original index page and rename that as index-original. Eventually, I'm going to delete it, but I don't want to delete it until I know I'm done with it. So now when I hit reload, it should call the new index page. And everything's set up for what's going to go on that page. All we have so far is the header section, so we won't see anything. We'll have to look at the page, view the page source to make sure it works, but we can do that. What line needs to go first, though? Can we just ask for that object right now? Or do we need something else there? Well, our blueprint is in another file, right? So just like we saw with our functions, when we put them in a library, we have to bring that in. So I'm going to do the require once. And with require and include, it's just whichever word makes more sense to you. And yeah, if you want to leave off the once part, that's fine. I've just consistently used require once every time. You could put include once, require, or require once. So essentially do the same thing. That brings in that other file. That says, for this code that we're getting ready to run, well, we need to refer to that blue page.php because it has the code we need. And now to ask for it, we set up a reference. So a variable like we're used to using, only this one's going to refer to our home page. Our home page, and well, the variables we've seen so far, we put our basic primitive data in there, right? We put in numbers, or we'd put in a couple characters to make a word, or put in a Boolean, and just our basic primitive data gets stuck in there to do stuff with. But this class that we defined is a blueprint for something. So now we can create something from that blueprint and put that in our variable. So we need the keyword new and then that class. A new blue page object, and it will have parentheses because whenever we ask for a new one, we're actually calling the constructor method. So do we know what content goes on the in there. I guess at this point, it doesn't matter. We haven't got up to the content yet. We'll talk about that in a moment. And now, in order to write code, we have this make head section that's going to make the head, write all that first part of the HTML code. Our doc type declaration, and then all the starting HTML code, then the whole head section. Oh, I just noticed this is a data field as well, isn't it? So I'm gonna take that out, put the quote marks and the dots, and bring in the title. This title, because we stored the company name there. It was a piece of data that might change. So I put where it's stored in that string as well, but that'll echo back that whole title section, so we can just ask for it. Because now we have instantiated that object. We took our blueprint and we made an object from that blueprint. And we stored it in this reference home, so we can ask for anything about that object, such anything public about that object. We cannot ask for our private variables here, but using that same arrow operator, which we don't need to say this anymore because we know exactly which one we're talking about. We're not talking about the generic one. We're talking about this one we called home, but it has a method called make head. And should be able to run this code. Does anybody have any questions about that before I go hit run and check for typos, because I was talking the whole time I was typing? So if I go back to just the folder here, oh, unexpected syntax. And this is going to be important. This is the next thing we're going to look at today. Tells us what error we have, a little message about it, the file it's in, and then the line it's in. We've seen that a few times, but for what's coming up in a few minutes, take note of that. Bluepage.php on line 16. So that's in the class. Well, yeah, it can't be here. We didn't even get up to 16 lines to make the page now. Line 16. Oh, that's the one you asked about, wasn't it, Tiv? You even pointed out that I forgot the semicolon. And I forgot to put it in there.
But you said line 16, and I think, was that a different line?
Well, line 16, it hit this curly brace. It said, I didn't expect, the computer's like, I didn't expect to hit a curly brace. So the curly brace ending that block can't be the problem. So if I start going backwards, the very previous symbol should have been the end of instruction symbol.
And while you're at it, you fix the other one because you knew it was going to hit next.
Yes, and I copied and pasted to get that, so I knew it was in there twice. You've probably seen, everybody's probably seen that before, right? Unexpected hitting a curly brace. Unexpected end of file. Cannot redeclare Blue Ridge. Oh, it doesn't like the overloading.
What do you mean by overloading?
Where I made two constructors. So that's something we often do, but yeah, it doesn't like the overloaded constructor. So let's go back to one where we just pass in our content for right now. Oh, actually, let's go with the other one. I'm going to take out the constructor where we pass stuff in and take out the other one. So overloading means we make more than one method of the same name, and that way that do slightly different things. So that way we'll use the blank constructor. We don't need to pass anything in, and we'll call this set content method later. Let's see if it likes that.
Does it say overloading, or did you just know that that's what it was?
That's the term for it. Overloading our methods.
Okay, I was trying to look for a cheap way to know that that was the reason, and I can't figure out why it's not working.
So we can look here in a little while. So I got the style sheet. View page source. We haven't put the content on there yet, but you can see all those words echoed back, and then the data that was stored just came back as a regular string by the time we get to this point. And now for any of our pages, we can do that much. We don't have to write that code anymore. So what's next? Oh, let's keep that in there. Then our navbar. So we need to echo back these work. I guess something to make the sections of the body page, right? So we need to echo back to the, I'll call that logo. Header is a reserved word in PHP, so we can't call that a header in PHP. So we need a function that makes that the same as we made that head section. So we'll create a public function called make, I'll call it logo. And again, it just needs to echo back the HTML that we want on every page, which will go from the opening body tag down to the closing header tag. And then the navbar, I was going to do the navbar as its own function in a moment. So I'll copy that and just paste it in here. And then what I like to do, I'll turn it into a string. So I get the opening and closing quote marks and the semicolon at the end. And then if you push home and hold shift and push home, it'll highlight all that indenting stuff. So home goes to the beginning, then shift home highlights all the way over so you can delete it with one click. Home, shift home, goes back, home, shift home, gets rid of all that at once. And this is some data, right? So we can change that out. I'll take that, break out of the string and concatenate, and that's stored at some place called this.title. And I wanted to keep that as data because, well, for this quick example, I just wrote the words there. But maybe that company has an official logo that would be better there. They'd rather see the logo than those words. And in that case, we could just have that data field store the location of the file with the company logo. So now, over in our index page, we can call that. So home points at this make logo.
If you wanted both, if you wanted the data and the logo image, you put within that the hyperreference link for the source image.
Yeah, that's what I would do. I just if it's a picture, I'll just put it in. I'll just store those data fields. Just store the link to the picture. So over in this
I've
object,
got practice to do with the images in the header. You know, I can't.
okay, your microphone's kind of cutting out. Oh, then you could put that in there. Actually, there's a thing coming up that will answer your question very, very nicely, Bree. Bree asked if the nav is in the header section. Well, we can put it right in there. But we're going to have a bunch of sections here, right? So I'm going to jump ahead and kind of make it easier so we don't have to keep coming back over here. Because we know we're going to call those every time in the same order, right? Because it's putting together HTML code, which needs to be in a particular order. So I'm going to make another function, public function make page, that just puts all those together as we need them. Oh, why'd that get unindented? So the first thing this one will do is call this make head function. And again, that function is inside of our object. So over here, or sorry, it's inside our class. After we instantiated that object, instantiated the class into an object, we had this reference, and we need that reference in order to access those methods. So when we're in our class, we need our keyword again, and say this class has a method called make head. And it also has a class, this make logo. So we can have a method that calls our other methods. And, or you could put the navbar, you could assemble it. So basically, you just want to assemble the HTML code inside of functions. And lots of short functions is better. You might remember from one of the introduction level classes, probably in the SDEV 120 class, what we want to look for with our functions is each function carries out a single task. So that's why I did like the head section and then the logo or the header. I couldn't call it header here because you'll see it changed colors. Header is a reserved word in PHP. So sometimes we have to adjust what we actually want to call it because that word's already in use in language. So now there's a function that's going to call all of these assemble HTML functions, or I should say methods, since we're in a class here. So over here, that's really the only one I need to call. I'm just going to call them make page method to assemble all those. And it should behave exactly the same. If I reload it, there we go. So it loaded in the head section, we can tell because the style sheet's there. And then it loaded in that header. And if you had the navbar in the header, then it would, you could just assemble it in that function. Or you could put the navbar in its own function, just keep lots of nice organization going, and ask for that function in the header where it goes. Because alternatively, I was echoing on every one of these. You can also just return them and build up one string in the end to go. There's different options. We're just kind of looking at some basic syntax, but there's lots of different ways this can go together. What's left? Our navbar, public function, navbar. So I'll go ahead and kind of do the same thing here. I'll just copy all this code and echo, opening quote mark, paste that in, closing quote mark, and semicolon so I don't forget it. And then I'm gonna clean it up. So I'll hit home, then shift home to get rid of all that indenting. Home, shift home, and backspace to get rid of all that. Home, shift home, clear all that out. Home, shift home, clear all that out. And once again, we have those, we need escape sequences. So like I pointed out earlier, if we work left to right, when we hit that first quotation mark, it changes the color. So it'd be make it a little easier if we start on the right side and work right to left, because when we hit the escape sequence for our closing quote mark, it doesn't change colors. So we can still spot quite easily where the opening quote mark is. And then I'm just going to scroll back and put all those backslashes in. Oops. Which those do need to change because they're going to be PHP things now, but they're all stored in an array. I think that's all of them. Oh, a couple more. That one, that one, that one, that one. And yeah, here in just a moment, we're going to take a break. And after the break, we'll see a better way to do this. Or after the break, we'll load in our main content and then see a better way to do this. Then we have all that Navbar stuff. But our page has changed. So now I'm going to go through here and replace those pages. So index.html, I'll take that out, put in quote marks, opening and closing, and then inside of that, I'll put the concatenation operators that are going to go on each side of the data. Then inside of that, I'll ask for that array. So this class has an array called links, which has an associative index called home, just to keep track of what goes there. And this is why I really like the associative indices. I'll always put the same word the users are going to see, and that helps to keep track of, makes it a lot easier to keep track of which one's which. So next one's order.html. So I'll take that out, put in quote marks, the concatenation operator, and then inside of that, put the this points at a links array that has something stored under the index order. Class names, and then same thing on this last one. Quote marks, inside of those, put in a couple dots, and then this class points to the links array with an index called review that has some links stored in it. And then up in the make page, we'll just ask for that method. Oh, I'm going to change that to say make nav. That way it's consistent with everything else I put. I think I just called it Navbar at first, but that's not really the best name. And then the next thing after that Navbar, well, we have just that aside tag, right? So we'll go ahead and put that in there just as a simple echo. You just need an open and closing the sidebar, aside element. So then I'll echo, after loading the navbar, echo opening tag, closing tag, because that's what I use to put the line on there. And reload it, check for typos. There we go. So we got a lot of our consistency already, right? All that stuff that's the same is there. So now, in order to get that stuff, we typed it up once in the blueprint, our design or our template for what this page, a page on this site looks like. Then our index page just says require. We need to require or include the file that has it. Then we create an instance of it, which is an object. And then from that object, we ask for our make page method. So if we wanted to make the orders page now, we create a PHP tag, require once, and I should save this so that it changes colors. This will be order.php. And I don't need to change the name of the previous one. I had to do that on index because remember, index is a special name we have. But on the rest of them, it's going to kind of change. So require once that blue page.php, and then I'll make an instance of it. So order is a new blue page with an empty constructor, as we can load in the content later. Oh, I meant to say order there. And then we just say order dot, oh, not dot. Order has a make page method, and save that. And when I click the link, the order page is already made. Well, not the form yet, but that's the part that changes. And that's going to be just as easy for us here in a few minutes. See how much easier it is to make our page now? Let's see. There was an old review page. So, oh, I had an S in this one. So the new review page will be made without an S. So to make the other page on the site, I got a PHP file that is, I'll save it as review.php. Require once blue page.php. Review equal, whoops, forgot my $sign. A variable called review is going to be a new blue page. And then we'll just say review as a make page method. And we'll go to the reviews page. All that consistent stuff is already made. So we only have to make it one time, and then we just ask for it over and over and over again. And I was typing those 3 lines, right? We don't really even have to type those. I'll go to the order page and select all that and just copy that into a new file. Or file, save a copy as our confirm.php page. Oh, whoops. Let's not do that yet. I'll rename the original confirm page. So I don't want to accidentally erase it. And now I'll just make a copy of that. Which one was it? Order.php. So copy and paste. And then change that copy to confirm.php. Oh, I guess I have to open it here with the text editor. And then all that really needs changed is the useful name to it. This will work exactly the same. I'm just going to put a useful name there instead of order, because that was useful on the previous page, the one I copied from. So there we go. A new page with only 2 words. Makes it a whole lot easier, right? I actually don't have anything that goes there yet, but I can type that in and check it. Confirm.php, which is what we go to when we place an order, has all that consistent stuff built in already. So that's what I meant by we're doing web stuff a site at a time. Everything that's going to be the same across the site, all the stuff that is there so that we can tell those pages go together. We built that all at once and just asked for versions of it. There's another one we're going to do here in a few minutes before the end of class today, where instead of those error messages, we'll go to a page with a nice looking apology on it. You know, the sorry for the inconvenience. It will be fixed soon, instead of just some error that would make a user panic. But hopefully that made you'll see how much of the work that cuts out. Because then we can go back and change any of that stuff. I guess the next thing we need to address that part that changes our main content, but we should probably take a break before we do that, right? 10 minutes sound good to everybody? All right, yeah, and I'm definitely needing a cup of coffee right about now, or some sort of beverage, and coffee is definitely my favorite beverage. So I'm gonna go get a cup of coffee, and we'll meet back here at 2:51. So